Stock in Palantir Technologies tumbled as much as 10% on Monday as investors weighed the possible budget cuts at the Pentagon and the impact that it could have on the data software firm's revenue. That's extending a 4-day drop in the company's shares. Shares have fallen about 20% since last Wednesday, when it was reported that the U.S. Department of Defense wants budget cuts of 8% over the next 5 years. Now, there have also been rumors of insider stock selling at Palantir, putting pressure on that stock. For more insight into Palantir's roller coaster ride, I spoke with John Tamny. John's the president of the Parkview Institute and an editor at RealClearMarkets. Thanks, John, for coming on. Fascinating story, a lot happening. Let's talk about what's been going on. Palantir stock dips. Can you call this a blip, or is it going to be something a lot more lasting than this, especially considering what the Trump administration is demanding from the new defense secretary?
Well, it's hard to imagine that the defense cuts or the proposed defense cuts have been the real driver of this. And the reason I say that is that massive across-the-board cuts, or at least the discussion of them, they've been priced for a long time. This wasn't anything new. This wasn't an unknown to the marketplace. It's also important to add on this that Palantir, while it is known to many people as a company that gets defense spending, that the defense spending is part of what makes it profitable or what's growing the company, the vast majority of its revenues come from outside of it. And so I think what we've got to look for is the entrance of an unknown, maybe insider sales, maybe people got nervous about how much the stock was up. But I think it would be very hard to tie all of this to proposed defense cuts.
Okay, talk a bit about its AI, what it does, and how it could have possibly been impacted by the Defense Department, though, because that has been such a well that so many companies have been able to go to for decades, knowing there's going to be a lot of government money out there to be spent.
Well, but remember, the vast majority of that money out there was private sector money trying to invent the future. And as it applies to defense spending, whether there were cuts or whether there are not going to be cuts, history says that it's always going to go back up over time, and markets will price that. But either way, what you'd have to say is that if anything, Palantir would be something that would be additive to a Defense Department that wants to essentially automate some of the doings formerly done by physical employees. It's not so much that it puts physical employees into bread lines, as much as it's something that elevates what the really skillful can do. And it's really hard to say that just based on some headlines out there that the Defense Department is looking to make 8% annual defense cuts. Whether or not that will happen is a much bigger. To tie then that to a decline like this really doesn't make a lot of sense, because you've got to remember, market corrections are always based on surprise.
Right.
These were knowns out there, and so we've got to look for surprises, and I'm still looking for what that might be.
Okay, let's talk about President Trump's impact on the U.S. markets so far. A lot of people say they were just simply caught flat-footed by the way that Trump and his administration jumped out of the box, demanding an overhaul, for lack of a better word, of the U.S. government. So has Trump been good for the markets, bad, and what's your answer based on?
Well, if you look at where the markets are relative to November 4th, you'd have to say there's been a market positive to his being elected. Could it be higher? That's not always it's the unseen that we always have to look for, because Trump had said things, some of his rhetoric would naturally be scary for markets. Specifically, let's look at the tariff talk. Trump talks about 25% tariffs on China, 25% on Canada, 25% on Mexico. Never forget how damaging that would be if it were true. Simply because when we export, that's an expression of a desire to import, and vice versa. If we're not taking in the imports from foreign countries, they can't buy from us. And you look at this in terms of China alone, what's the most valuable company in the world? Well, it's Apple. It gets a fifth of its iPhone sales from China. If we go into a trade war with China that causes us to wall ourselves off from the other, that's going to be very damaging to all economies, including ours.
Absolutely.
So we have to look for him looking for ways out of that.
Okay, time for one more question. What's your main takeaway from Palantir CEO Alex Karp's speech at the Economic Club of New York?
Oh, I think that the main takeaway from it is that they're going to grow no matter what. This is a company that's been around since 2003. to presume that any company would basically start from ground zero, from the bottom, and say we're going to base our future on what the government does, how much it spends. We're talking about someone who wants to use technology to better the world. That's a world that's going to require a lot less government spending, not a lot more. So I would take from this that you've got, if you're in Palantir, you've got to accept that precisely because it's gone up so much, you have to accept near-term volatility, which you get with any company that is going out there to invent the future.
Okay, John Tamny, thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.